Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this legislation, which, again, is no stranger, sadly, to this Congress. This is the fifth time that the majority party has introduced it, going back to 1997, and each time the huge flaws in this legislation has resulted in its complete collapse in terms of getting anything close to real support through both chambers and through the executive branch. And once again, it doesn't deserve that support in this case. Despite the representations made in its title that it promotes workers' flexibility, that it gives workers choice, the fact of the matter is a closer examination of the bill shows the opposite is true. The better way to describe this bill is the more work, pay less bill, because what it does is it takes the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, which created a bright line to protect people's right to a 40-hour work week, and make sure that that next hour after 40 hours is paid for with a time and a half of wages. And again, that created the weekend in America. That created the time off that families have taken for granted as middle-class Americans for decades. What this bill does is it blurs that line. It creates total chaos in terms of trying to come up with a system to set up ground rules with a case-by-case contract, written contract that's mandated by the language of the bill, and then leaves it to the enforcement of state labor departments, wage and hours division. They're totally incapable of going into the tens of thousands of workplaces all across America and trying to figure out whether or not, in fact, the rules have been followed. A closer examination of the bill shows on page 8 of the bill in lines 7 through 10 that in fact all these representations that the worker gets to choose are in fact not correct. At the end of the day, the employer has the right to veto any comp time that this bill has allowed to accrue over any period of time. So the notion that somehow a person has that choice to accumulate comp time and then be able to use it for a family vacation or a family emergency, in fact, does not meet the actual plain language of the bill that is before us today. And that is why organizations which represent working families, organizations which represent women, organizations which have been part of employment law for years and years and years in this country have resoundingly come out in opposition to this legislation. Over 160 various organizations of every stripe representing religious groups, women's groups, labor groups, groups that, again, deal with employment law, have basically looked at this legislation for the fifth time and given it thumbs down. The fact is we should do that. There is no question, however, that workers do, in fact, need more help in terms of making sure that the wages that have stagnated over the last 3 decades get more support, that families who, again, are strained by the fact that those stagnating wages have required second jobs and multiple spouses in the workforce. But the fact is there are much better solutions than this legislation, the More Work, Pay Less Act. In fact, what we should do is set up a standard for paid sick leave in this country so that a single parent waking up with a child whose temperature is over 100 degrees doesn't feel that they have no choice in terms of how to deal with that situation, that they have some guaranteed opportunity without losing the pay that they need to put food on the table or put gas in the tank, that they in fact have that choice, which so many of us here as members of Congress and our staff certainly apply the same standards in terms of sick pay that we enjoy to the working people of this country. This bill doesn't do it. This bill does not meet that test. Again, it sets up a system that is completely unworkable and unenforceable. It butchers the Fair Labor Standards Act's bright line that has protected the American weekend for decades and decades in this country, and in the name of workplace flexibility, in fact, tips the scales of power within the American workforce once again against the worker, against the employee, who basically for far too long has suffered in this economy. We need better solutions. This is not the bill, and I would, again, reserve the balance of my time.